In the bustling streets of 19th century Chicago, where innovation danced with progress, a shadow of discrimination loomed large. Enter the Chicago Ugly Laws of 1881, a curious yet dark chapter in the city's history, where the concept of beauty dictated who could walk its avenues freely. Picture this. Amid the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the hum of industry, there existed a silent code, one that deemed certain faces unfit for public view. But what were these laws, you ask? And why did they target the unsightly? In 1729 England, punishment was sometimes given to people with physical disabilities who were seen in public, whether they were born with the disabilities or acquired them later in life. Ugly laws started in the United States during the late 19th century. Cities were getting crowded with new residents, often poor, leading to tensions. To deal with this, ministers, charities, and city officials made laws to keep people with disabilities out of sight. These laws focused on hiding any signs of disability or illness, like limping. The first American law against disabled people in public was in San Francisco in 1867, mainly aimed at beggars. Many came to California during the gold rush seeking wealth but ended up staying. Afterward, there were reports of many insane people wandering the streets. Similar laws were enforced in New Orleans in 1883 and Portland, Oregon in 1881. The Chicago Ordinance of 1881 read as follows: any person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object or an improper person to be allowed in or on the streets, highways, thoroughfares, or public places in the city, shall not therein or thereon expose himself or herself to public view, under the penalty of a fine of $1 for each offense. Chicago City Code 1881. The fine of $1 back then equals over $30 in 2023. Punishments for breaking ugly laws in most cities range from jail time to fines of up to $50 for each offense. In May 1881, Chicago, Illinois enacted an unsightly beggar ordinance, spearheaded by Alderman James Peavy. Peavy stated that the goal of the ordinance was to clear the streets of obstructions, as reported in the Chicago Tribune on May 19, 1881. Ugly laws targeted certain groups, labeling them as disruptive to public life and prohibiting their presence in public spaces. These individuals, often impoverished beggars, were deemed unsightly or unseemly, prompting lawmakers to try to keep them out of sight. Similar laws emerged in Denver, Colorado, and Lincoln, Nebraska in 1889. Omaha, Nebraska also had an ugly law sometime between 1881 and 1890. The Panic of 1893 led to more of these laws, including ones in Columbus, Ohio in 1894, and for the whole state of Pennsylvania in 1891, which included provisions for cognitive disabilities as well as physical ones. An attempt to introduce similar laws in New York failed in 1895, although early drafts resembled those in Pennsylvania. Reno, Nevada had an ordinance before 1905, and Los Angeles, California tried to pass one in 1913. In 1902, the city of Manila in the Philippines enacted a law similar to those in the United States, written in English during American rule, which included the clause, "No person who is diseased." This was one of the first ordinances under American control, part of hygiene reforms that targeted unsightly beggars. The last ugly laws were repealed in 1974. Omaha, Nebraska scrapped its law in 1967, but an arrest for violating the unsightly beggar ordinance was documented in 1974. Columbus, Ohio repealed its law in 1972, and Chicago was the final city to repeal its ugly law in 1974. People charged under the ugly laws were either fined or detained until they could be sent to a poor house or work farm. The language in the San Francisco Ordinance suggested that violators would be sent to the almshouse, reflecting Victorian-era poor law policies. Historian Brad Byram observed that ugly laws were rarely and inconsistently enforced, often ignored by police. The first documented arrest related to ugly laws occurred in San Francisco, California in July 1867, involving Martin Oates, a former Union soldier during the American Civil War. Ugly laws did not prohibit performances by people with disabilities for entertainment or shock value, but rather aimed to keep them from interacting with the general public. Even after the signing of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, ugly laws were still being used to regulate the presence of people with disabilities in public spaces. Racism also played a significant role in the creation and enforcement of ugly laws. In 1860s, San Francisco, Chinese immigrants and their descendants were unjustly quarantined en masse to prevent the spread of disease and epidemics. The last known arrest linked to an ugly law occurred in 1974 under an ordinance in Omaha, Nebraska. In this case, the arrested individual was homeless, and the arresting officer cited the ugly law due to visible scars and marks on his body. However, Judge Walter Cropper and Assistant Prosecutor Richard Epstein noted the absence of a legal definition for ugly, leading the city prosecutor, Gary Bacchino, to decline filing charges. Despite the law's existence, the individual did not fit the criteria for prosecution. Ugly laws barred many people with physical disabilities from participating in public life altogether. According to British scholar Stuart Murray, the widespread adoption of ugly laws is distinctly American, reflecting a unique societal unease with disability. Jacobus ten Broek argued in 1966 that restrictions placed on individuals with disabilities were not based on their actual capabilities, but rather on society's unfounded fears and perceptions. In a 1975 newspaper article titled "A History of Unequal Treatment: The Qualifications of Handicapped Persons as a Suspect Class Under the Equal Protection Clause," Marcia Pierce Bergdorf and Robert Bergdorf, Jr. coined the term ugly laws while discussing unsightly beggar ordinances. This act served as an advocacy effort. The play The Body of Bourne by John Beluso features a scene where Randolph Bourne encounters an ugly law in Chicago. While fictional, this portrayal sheds light on the impact of such laws on disability history. During a European tour in 1980, Victoria Ann Lewis, a performer with the San Francisco-based Lilith Women's Theater, delivered a monologue highlighting the challenges faced by people with disabilities in finding employment. She believes she was denied admission to a theater school in New York City due to her limp, attributing it to the stigma perpetuated by ugly laws, which made performing difficult in certain cities. There was a correlation between ugly laws and public hygiene management schemes, including practices like segregation, eugenics, and institutionalization. Ugly laws significantly influence societal perceptions of rehabilitation. In rehabilitationist programs, the goal was often to make disability disappear, aiming to assimilate individuals with disabilities into the broader social fabric. While public begging for basic needs was prohibited, it was acceptable for people with disabilities to commercialize themselves in hopes of finding a cure or salvation from their condition. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.